The license flipped at midnight in Beijing, and the rest of the world pretended it was just paperwork. It wasn't. On January 1st, 2026, China put refined silver behind a gate, and only 44 state-approved firms got the keys. That's what happened. Clean, cold, documented. Refined metal exports now run through a licensing choke point, not a free-flow pipeline. And the moment you understand that, you realize the silver market didn't get volatile. It got split in two. I'm your host, and this is our channel. Let's talk like adults, because the next phase isn't about charts, it's about access. Here's the contradiction you need to feel in your gut. Paper silver still trades like a video game on Western screens. Physical silver moves like oxygen in Asia. Same element, same atomic number, two different realities. Late December, Shanghai was paying a premium that made the futures price look like a typo. One market said, "Deliver the metal." The other said, "Relax, we'll settle later." That spread is not noise. That spread is stress. And stress has a pattern. First, premiums widen. Then lease rates spike. Then inventories drain. Then somebody, somewhere, says a sentence that changes everything. We can't source enough refined feedstock. Now watch this. People hear China processed a lot of silver, and their brain shuts off. They imagine warehouses with infinite bars. They imagine supply that will show up eventually. But refined silver is not ore. Ore is dirt with potential. Refined silver is the finished input factories consume today. So when refined exports get gated, we're not talking about a long-term mining project. We're talking about next quarter's production lines. Fact: the new system narrows legal export channels to 44 approved firms. Interpretation: the world just lost optionality. Optionality is what prevents panic. Optionality is what lets buyers say, if this supplier gets tight, we'll switch. When that option disappears, demand doesn't vanish. It concentrates. It rushes. Here's the part most people miss, and it matters. If you saw big export numbers right before January 1st, that wasn't generosity. That was escape velocity. It was the last open door, and everyone sprinted through it. So if the tape looks calm while the pipeline gets narrower, don't get hypnotized. Calm is what manipulation looks like right before reality interrupts it. Now let's talk about the second thing that happened, because it was timed like a trap. Silver tagged a record high late December, and then it got slammed within days. Not because the world stopped needing silver, not because a miracle mine appeared, because the paper arena tightened the noose. Margin requirements moved, leverage got expensive overnight. Traders who never planned to take delivery were forced to puke contracts. The paper price dropped fast, and physical buyers kept paying up anyway. That is not a correction. That's an engineered liquidation in the paper casino while the physical world keeps bidding for oxygen. We need to separate the screen from the metal. Paper can be pushed. Metal has to be moved. And this is where we stop using lazy words like shortage without defining them. There are two kinds of shortages. A price shortage means the metal exists, but you don't like the cost. That's normal. Market's clear. A logistics shortage means the metal isn't where you need it, when you need it, in the form you need it. That's production downtime. That's missed shipments. That's panic. In 2026, the danger is the second one. Ask yourself a simple question. If refined silver is plentiful, why did Shanghai have to pay up to pull metal in? Why did the physical market need a bribe? Now watch the concept that scares people because it sounds academic, but it's actually primal. Backwardation. One-line definition. Backwardation is when buying now costs more than promising to buy later. Why it matters. It means time is more valuable than money. It means the market is screaming, "Deliver immediately." When you see that behavior flirt into view, you're watching a system under tension. And tension doesn't unwind politely. It snaps. So we don't obsess over a single candle. We watch the plumbing. We watch spreads. We watch lease rates. We watch inventory drawdowns. We watch whether eligible metal replaces registered metal, or whether the shelves just keep emptying. Because the shelves don't lie. Here's another uncomfortable fact. Tons in a vault doesn't automatically mean tons for sale. A lot of metal is spoken for, locked in long-term holdings, tied to contracts, sitting inside products that will not be melted down unless price becomes absurd. So the only number that matters in a squeeze is free float, tradable, deliverable, unencumbered. And when free float tightens, silver stops behaving like finance and starts behaving like survival. That's when you see the weird stuff. Premiums that don't collapse on dips, delivery claims that don't roll, buyers that don't negotiate, because industrial buyers don't get to feel, they get to deliver. Now let's talk about demand like we're not asleep. Solar is not a hobby anymore. It's a global build-out. Every panel is a tiny silver vampire. Multiply that by policy mandates and grid upgrades, and you're not in a cyclical demand story. You're in a structural consumption story. Then you've got electrification. EVs aren't just cars with batteries. They're rolling power systems. Higher voltage, more connectivity, more contact points, more silver. Then you've got data centers and high-performance hardware. The world is wiring itself for AI compute, and the people building that infrastructure do not care if silver is $70 or $100. They care about uptime. So, the buyer at the margin isn't a speculator, it's a procurement officer with a deadline. And procurement officers don't ask permission, they secure supply. Now, here's the supply trap that makes silver so violent. Most silver is not mined because someone wants silver. It rides shotgun as a byproduct of copper, lead, and zinc. That means silver supply does not surge just because silver gets expensive. If copper projects slow, silver slows. If zinc economics don't justify expansion, silver doesn't magically appear. So when people say, higher prices will bring more supply, our response is simple. Show us the mine. Show us the permit. Show us the mill. Show us the timeline. Because 2026 supply is mostly locked. Mining doesn't pivot on a dime. Refining doesn't pivot on a dime. Permits don't care about your bullish thesis. The system rebalances through price, or it doesn't rebalance at all. And now, China just tightened the valve on refined output. Let's be strategic about what that means. A licensing system doesn't have to be a total ban to behave like a ban. You reduce the exporter list. You raise compliance hurdles. You require financing. You require scale. You create a gate. And the power of a gate isn't just control, it's uncertainty. Uncertainty forces behavior changes. Companies hoard. They pre-buy. They over-order. They pull forward demand. They sign contracts earlier. They tie up metal before it ever touches the spot market. That hoarding makes the shortage look sudden, but it's not sudden. It's rational. It's the same dynamic as a bank run. A bank can look fine on paper until too many people demand cash at the same time. Then the only thing that matters is what's in the vault today. So ask yourself this. How many paper claims exist for each physical ounce that can actually be delivered? Most of the time, it doesn't matter. Traders never ask for delivery. They trade the idea of silver. But what happens when the buyers are not traders? What happens when the buyers are factories? You can't solder a photovoltaic cell with a futures contract. You can't plate a server connector with a spreadsheet. You need atoms. And atoms don't accept cash settlement. This is where we use the trust framework, because hype is cheap and we're not gambling. We're measuring. Fact. China implemented a refined silver export licensing system starting January 1, 2026. Fact. Only a limited set of approved exporters can ship refined silver under the new rules. Fact. Physical markets have shown premiums versus paper benchmarks during periods of stress. Interpretation. The probability of a physical squeeze rises when inventories are thin and a major processing choke point adds friction. Possible risk. Global growth slows sharply, some industrial demand cools, and the pressure releases temporarily. We don't worship one outcome. We watch the indicators. Now, let's talk about those indicators like detectives. If Shanghai premiums compress quickly after the switch, that suggests flows are still getting through, at least for now. If premiums persist or widen, that means buyers are still paying to secure metal today, not later. If lease rates stay elevated, it means borrowers are paying up for physical. That's stress. If inventories keep draining in multiple hubs at once, that's not a local issue. That's systemic. And the most important signal won't be a chart pattern. It will be a logistics story. A delayed shipment, a contract renegotiation, a manufacturer quietly changing delivery dates. That's the moment the market goes from how high can it go to can we get it? And when the question becomes can we get it, the scramble begins. Here's the psychological warfare you need to expect. When silver rips, the paper venues can tighten leverage. They can jack margins. They can force liquidations. They can create violent pullbacks that feel like the story is over. But pullbacks in a physical squeeze don't create new metal. They only shake weak hands and buy time. So if you watch only the futures chart, you'll get whiplash and miss the real story. The real story lives in the spreads, the premiums, and the warehouse reports. Think of it like this. Paper price is the weather. Physical availability is the climate. Weather swings, climate shifts. A rainy day doesn't end a drought. So what's the climate shift here? 5 years of deficits, depleted buffers, industrial demand that doesn't blink, and now a policy lever on refined exports. That's not a cute narrative. That's a tightening system. Now let's address the question people avoid because it sounds too extreme, until it isn't. Allocation. If silver becomes strategic, governments don't just watch, they act. They prioritize certain industries. They subsidize inputs. They redirect supply. They restrict exports. They pressure refiners. They make deals. That's not conspiracy. That's wartime logistics logic, and the energy transition is being treated like a national mission. If a government decides solar manufacturing or semiconductor supply is critical, it will not care about a retail investor's opinion about free markets. National strategy wins. So the risk isn't only higher prices. The risk is access. And access is the kind of risk chart watchers never price in until the shelf is empty. Now ask the most important open loop in this whole story. If the West can't rely on Chinese refined exports the way it used to, where does replacement capacity come from? Not eventually, not over a decade. Where does it come from this year? Because building refining capacity is slow, expensive, and politically messy. Environmental hurdles, chemical expertise, capex, permitting, and the calendar doesn't care that we're late. So in the short run, the market has one solution: bid higher. Bid high enough to pull metal out of hiding. Bid high enough to make recycling suddenly worth it. Bid high enough to force substitution where possible. But here's the catch. Industrial demand doesn't substitute easily. Silver is used because it's the best at what it does: conductivity, reliability, performance under stress. You can thrift around the edges, sure. You can redesign a component, you can shave grams. But if you thrift too far, you pay for it in failure rates. And failure rates are more expensive than metal. So the demand is sticky. And sticky demand meeting gated supply is how you get violent repricing. This is why silver doesn't climb stairs. It takes elevators. It looks calm until it isn't. And the public won't believe it until the headline isn't about price. It's about delivery. It's about delays. It's about factories. And by the time that headline hits, the easy positioning is gone. Because the tape moves last. Physics moves first. Now, we should also be honest about the temptation to chase a single number. Is it $100? $125? Higher? That's the wrong framing. The right framing is conditional. If premiums stay wide and inventories keep draining, the upside case strengthens. If premiums collapse and inventory rebuilds, the urgency fades. We don't need prophecy. We need a dashboard. So our dashboard for Q1 2026 is simple: premiums, lease rates, inventory draws, delivery claims, and policy language. Because policy language changes before the public notices. You'll see phrases like temporary measures, compliance updates, operational constraints. That's smoke. And if we see smoke, the fire is already burning somewhere in the supply chain. Now, I want to pull you into the room with us, because this is where viewers usually disengage, and we're not letting that happen. Imagine you run a solar manufacturer. Your orders are booked, your lines run on schedule. Your margins are thin. One missing input can halt the line. Do you wait for the price to come back down? Or do you pay the premium and lock your feedstock? You pay. And that buying pressure doesn't show up first in Comex candles. It shows up in premiums. Now, imagine you run a data center build-out. Your contract penalties for delays dwarf the extra cost of silver. Do you gamble on paper settling later? Or do you secure the metal? You secure it. Now, imagine you're a government staring at electrification targets. Do you allow a strategic input to be siphoned away with no control? Or do you tighten? You tighten. So the direction of travel is clear. The only question is, how fast? And speed is what turns a normal bull market into a force majeure event. And we can't pretend the vaults are an abstract concept, because vaults are where narratives crash into reality. When registered inventory gets pulled, that's not a sentiment shift. That's a claim ticket turning into a forklift. We've watched the same pattern across hubs. One location draws down, then another, then the arbitrage channels start choking. Here's the math that matters, without fantasy. If the world runs year after year where demand outpaces supply, the buffer isn't a buffer, it's a burn pile. Every deficit year forces metal out of stockpiles, out of long-term hands, out of places that were never meant to feed factories. You can do that for a while. Then the system has nothing left to burn. And silver has a special problem. Supply is slow, and a huge chunk of what exists is dispersed. Tiny amounts in billions of devices, a thin layer in panels. Recovering it is expensive, messy, and delayed. So when someone says recycling will solve it, we ask the only adult question. Solve it when? A phone you toss today doesn't become refined silver next month. A panel installed this year doesn't come back as feedstock in 2026. Recycling is a long tail. A squeeze is a short fuse. Now add China's licensing gauge to that fuse. This is why force majeure is suddenly back in the conversation. Contracts get written assuming metal can be sourced. When it can't, paperwork becomes a prayer. And once one big buyer triggers that clause, the market reprices risk fast. Not gradually, fast. So we watch for the first domino. Will it be a solar manufacturer quietly delaying shipments? Will it be an electronics supplier pushing lead times out? Will it be a refiner announcing temporary maintenance that magically lasts longer than planned? Or will it be the exchanges themselves, raising margins and rewriting rules to keep the paper arena from admitting what the physical arena already knows? Because if the paper game loses credibility, it doesn't just move price, it moves behavior. More buyers insist on delivery, more sellers demand premium, more metal disappears into private contracts. That is how a market goes illiquid without ever running out on a spreadsheet. Now, I'm going to say one sentence that should make you stop scrolling. If refined silver flow gets even slightly disrupted while inventories are already thin, the market doesn't need years to break. It can break in weeks. Because supply chains don't fail gradually, they fail at the margin. They fail when one link doesn't show up. And the first visible crack won't be a price spike, it'll be a temporary delay. That's the phrase that means the metal isn't late, it's gone. So here are two questions for the comments, and I want real answers, not vibes. If paper claims are abundant, but physical premiums are screaming, which market do you trust? And if China controls the gate on refined exports, what happens the first time domestic demand inside China spikes and the gate narrows again? Now, quick, clean disclaimer, because we manage risk. This is educational, not financial advice, and we size positions like adults. If you want us tracking premiums, inventories, and policy shifts as this story develops, subscribe. Short, simple. Stay ahead of the tape. Because Q1 2026 won't announce itself with fireworks. It will announce itself with a phone call. And by the time the call becomes a headline, the the shelf is already bare.